I never imagined that losing my son Marcus would cost me everything twice. First, I lost him to cancer at 38. Then his wife Madison took the $57 million fortune I'd built for him and threw me out of the house I'd bought them, telling me to go die in a dumpster. But what she didn't know was that I'd learned a thing or two about contracts in my 40 years on Wall Street. Sometimes the smallest words make the biggest difference. My name is Shelby, and at 68 years old, I thought I'd seen everything the financial world could throw at a person. 4 decades on Wall Street teaches you about greed betrayal and the lengths people will go to for money. But nothing prepared me for the deception that would come from within my own family. I retired early at 62, right after my wife Dorothy passed away from a sudden heart attack. We'd been married 37 years, and her death left a hole in my life that felt impossible to fill. The only thing that kept me going was our son Marcus. He was everything a father could hope for, brilliant, kind, and driven. After graduating from Harvard Law, he'd built a successful career as a corporate attorney in Manhattan, handling mergers and acquisitions for Fortune 500 companies. The fortune I'd accumulated wasn't built overnight. Through careful investments, real estate ventures, and a few lucky breaks during the tech boom, I'd managed to build a portfolio worth over $60 million. Dorothy and I had lived modestly, saving and investing for Marcus's future. We wanted him to have every opportunity, every advantage we could provide. Madison entered our lives 7 years ago at a charity gala for childhood cancer research. Marcus was immediately smitten. She was 29, then stunningly beautiful with auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to sparkle when she laughed. She worked as an event planner for high-end clients in the city, organizing elaborate parties and corporate functions. Her background was modest. She'd grown up in a small town in Ohio, worked her way through state college, and moved to New York with big dreams. I'll admit I had reservations at first. There was something almost too perfect about how quickly she integrated herself into our lives. Within 6 months, she was calling me Dad and joining us for every family tradition. She remembered birthdays, sent thoughtful cards, and always knew exactly what to say. Dorothy would have been more suspicious, but I was lonely and grateful to see Marcus so happy. Their wedding was a grand affair at the Rainbow Room with 300 guests. I paid for everything, nearly $500,000 for the celebration Madison had always dreamed of. As a wedding gift, I purchased them a $7 million estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, complete with 8 bedrooms, a pool house, and perfectly manicured grounds. Madison cried when I handed them the keys, saying no one had ever been so generous to her. For 3 years, everything seemed perfect. Madison quit her job to focus on being a wife and homemaker. She hosted dinner parties that would have made Dorothy proud, volunteered for Marcus's law firm charity events, and took care of me like I was her own father. When I had knee surgery, she moved into my apartment for 2 weeks to ensure I followed doctor's orders. The only shadow over their happiness was their struggle with infertility. Month after month brought disappointment. I watched my son's eyes dim a little more with each negative test. Madison threw herself into fertility treatments with the same determination she brought to everything else. I paid for the best specialists' experimental treatments, anything that might help them have the child they desperately wanted. It was during one of our regular Sunday dinners that I first sensed something was wrong. We were eating in their formal dining room, Madison serving her famous pot roast when her phone lit up on the sideboard. She always kept it on silent during family meals, but I could see the screen from where I sat. The message preview showed, "Stop playing happy family. When will you be free?" The sender's name was Jake. Madison's face went pale when she noticed I'd seen it. She jumped up, grabbed the phone, and quickly shoved it in her pocket. "Just work stuff," she said with a nervous laugh. "You know how demanding clients can be even on weekends." Marcus didn't seem to notice the exchange deep in conversation about a case he was working on. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The message itself wasn't necessarily incriminating, but Madison's reaction troubled me. The way her hands shook slightly as she served dessert, how she avoided my eyes for the rest of the evening. I told myself I was being paranoid. Madison had given me no reason to doubt her love for Marcus. She was the perfect wife, in every way devoted and caring. Maybe Jake was just a difficult client. Event planning could be stressful dealing with demanding people who expected perfection. Still, I found myself watching her more carefully after that night, noting small things I'd previously overlooked. The way she sometimes stared into space when she thought no one was looking, as if calculating something. How she always steered conversations about their future toward financial security rather than children, despite their ongoing fertility treatments. The meticulous way she organized Marcus's documents, always volunteering to file his papers and manage their household accounts. 6 months after that unsettling dinner, our world shattered. Marcus was in the middle of presenting at a major merger meeting when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence, his face contorting in confusion. According to his colleague who called me, Marcus tried to continue, but the words came out jumbled, making no sense. Then he collapsed, his body convulsing on the conference room floor while his terrified clients watched. I met the ambulance at Mount Sinai Hospital, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Madison arrived minutes later, tears streaming down her face as she clutched my arm. "What happened? Is he okay?" "Please, someone tell me he's okay." The tests revealed our worst nightmare: glioblastoma, multiform and aggressive brain tumor that had already spread its tentacles deep into Marcus's temporal lobe. The oncologist, Dr. Patricia Yates, didn't sugarcoat the diagnosis. Stage 4, inoperable due to location. Even with aggressive treatment, we were looking at months, not years. I watched my son process his death sentence with the same analytical mind he brought to legal briefs. He asked about survival rates, treatment options, clinical trials. Madison sat beside him, holding his hand, promising they would fight this together. Her transformation was immediate and complete. The socialite event planner vanished, replaced by a fierce caregiver who threw herself into battle against the disease. She quit her remaining clients without hesitation, dedicating every moment to Marcus's care. She researched treatments, obsessively contacted specialists across the globe, organized his medications with military precision. When Marcus struggled to remember simple words, she became his voice. When he couldn't navigate the stairs, she became his support. I moved into their guest house to help, though Madison insisted she could handle everything. Still, I needed to be close to my boy. Those early days blurred together in a haze of hospital visits, treatment sessions, and sleepless nights. Madison managed it all with a grace that astounded me. She never complained, never showed fatigue, never let Marcus see her cry. "You should rest," I told her one evening after a particularly brutal chemotherapy session. Marcus was finally sleeping, his head now bald and marked with surgical scars. "I can watch him tonight." She shook her head, adjusting his blanket with practiced hands. "I'm fine, Dad. This is what love looks like, right?" In sickness and health. Her devotion seemed to deepen as Marcus grew weaker. She handled all his medications, carefully measuring doses and tracking side effects in a detailed journal. She coordinated with insurance companies, fighting for coverage of experimental treatments. When Marcus mentioned wanting to update his will, she was the one who contacted Harold Whitman, our family attorney. "I want to make sure Madison is protected," Marcus told me privately during one of his lucid periods. "If something happens to me, she needs to be okay financially. Promise me you'll help her." "Nothing's going to happen," I lied, holding his increasingly frail hand. "But of course, son. Madison is family." The will preparations became Madison's new project. She accompanied Marcus to every meeting with Harold, taking notes and asking detailed questions about estate planning. When Harold suggested Marcus might want some meetings alone, Madison's eyes filled with tears. "We don't have secrets," she said. Whatever time we have left, I want to spend it together." Harold, who'd known our family for 20 years, seemed charmed by her dedication. He answered all her questions about trust structures, tax implications, and inheritance law with patience. I noticed she had a particular interest in the mechanics of asset transfer, but assumed it was natural anxiety about her future security. As autumn turned to winter, Marcus's condition deteriorated rapidly. The tumor seemed to feed on our hope growing, despite radiation and chemotherapy. He began having seizures that left him disoriented for hours. His brilliant legal mind, once sharp enough to spot loopholes in 1,000-page contracts, struggled to remember his colleagues' names. Madison never wavered. She slept on a cot beside his bed, waking instantly when he stirred. She puried his favorite foods when swallowing became difficult, played audiobooks of legal thrillers when he couldn't focus on reading maintained detailed logs of every symptom for his medical team. One night, unable to sleep, I walked out to the garden for fresh air. The house was dark except for the soft glow from Marcus's room, where Madison kept vigil. Through the window, I could see her silhouette as she adjusted his IV drip. Then I heard her voice, low and urgent, carrying through the still night air. She was on the phone pacing by the pool house, probably thinking she was far enough away not to be overheard. But sound travels strangely on quiet nights, and her words reached me with crystal clarity. "Just a little longer, baby. The old fool trusts me completely. Once this is over, we'll have everything we've worked for. The house, the money, all of it. Then we can finally stop pretending." My blood turned to ice. I pressed myself against the garden wall, praying she wouldn't see me. She continued talking, her voice taking on a harder edge I'd never heard before. "No, Jake, listen to me. I've put in 7 years of this performance. I'm not walking away now when we're so close. A few more weeks, maybe less. The doctor said the tumor is growing faster than expected. Just be patient." She paused, listening to whoever Jake was, then laughed. It was a cold sound that bore no resemblance to the warm laughter that had charmed us all. "Of course I don't feel guilty. You didn't see how they lived before I came along, rattling around in their loneliness. I gave Marcus the best years of his life. He'll die thinking himself loved. That's more than most people get." I stumbled back to the guest house in shock, my mind reeling. Everything had been a lie. Every gesture of love, every tear, every devoted moment had been calculated performance. My son was dying, and the woman he adored was counting the days until she could collect her payout. But what could I do? Confront her and destroy Marcus's final days. Tell him the woman he loved was a monster waiting for him to die. I couldn't bear to shatter his illusions when he had so little time left. So I did what seemed like the only option. I kept silent and watched, hoping I'd misunderstood, praying I was wrong. Marcus died on a gray Tuesday morning in February, 3 days after his 39th birthday. I was holding his hand when it happened, feeling the moment his fingers went slack in mine. Madison was there too, her face pressed against his shoulders, shaking with what appeared to be genuine grief. Even knowing what I knew, her performance was flawless. The funeral arrangements fell to Madison, and she orchestrated them with the same attention to detail she'd brought to his care. St. Patrick's Cathedral for the service, a massive affair befitting a successful Manhattan attorney. She chose readings from Marcus's favorite books, selected music he'd loved, created photo boards showing his life from baby pictures through our last Christmas together. The morning of the funeral, I stood in my bedroom trying to knot my tie with trembling fingers. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus as a boy running through Central Park, with a kite graduating from Harvard, dancing with Madison at their wedding. How had we come to this moment so quickly? 39 years wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Hundreds of people filled the cathedral, colleagues from his firm law school classmates, childhood friends who'd flown in from across the country, clients whose lives he'd touched. Madison sat in the front pew, looking devastatingly beautiful in her grief, a black veil partially obscuring her face. She held my hand throughout the service, occasionally squeezing it, as if we were supporting each other. When it came time for eulogies, Madison took the podium with remarkable composure. Her voice broke only once as she spoke about their perfect love story and how Marcus had made her believe in happily ever after. She told the story of their meeting, their struggles with infertility, their dreams for the future that would never be realized. "Marcus taught me what real love looks like," she said, dabbing at her eyes. "He was my everything, my whole world. I don't know how I'll go on without him, but I promise to honor his memory by living the way he taught me, with kindness, generosity, and love." The congregation wept. Several of Marcus's colleagues had to leave the church overcome with emotion. I sat frozen watching this masterful performance with a mixture of rage and disbelief. She was using my son's funeral as a stage, playing the grieving widow to perfection, while presumably counting down to her payday. As people filed out for the procession to the cemetery, I noticed a man standing in the back of the church. Tall, muscular, with the build of someone who spent serious time in a gym. He was watching Madison intently, not with the sympathetic gaze of a mourner, but with something more personal, more possessive. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away and slipped out a side door. The burial itself was private, just family and Marcus's closest friends. Madison had chosen a plot in a beautiful section of the cemetery beneath an old oak tree. As they lowered my son into the ground, I thought my knees might buckle. Only Madison's arm through mine kept me upright, this woman who was simultaneously supporting me and planning to destroy me. Back at the Greenwich house afterward, Madison had arranged for caterers to handle the reception. She moved through the crowd of mourners like a professional hostess, accepting condolences, sharing memories, ensuring everyone had food and drinks. I overheard her telling Marcus's law partner about her plans to establish a scholarship in his name. He would have wanted to help young lawyers from disadvantaged backgrounds. She said, fresh tears appearing on cue. Marcus never forgot how lucky he was to have opportunities others didn't. Harold Whitman pulled me aside near the end of the reception. "Shelby, I'm so sorry for your loss. Marcus was a fine man." He paused, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "We should schedule the will reading soon. Madison's been quite anxious about it, calling my office repeatedly. How does Monday work for you?" I nodded, too exhausted to speak. Madison's eagerness didn't surprise me anymore. She'd waited 7 years for this moment. What were a few more days? That night, after all the guests had gone and the caterers had cleaned up, I sat alone in the guest house staring at photos of Marcus. My boy, my only child, gone forever. The house felt impossibly empty, despite Madison being just a few hundred yards away in the main house. Or maybe because of it. Sunday evening, as I was packing up some of Marcus's childhood items I'd been storing, Madison knocked on my door. She entered without waiting for a response, and I saw immediately that something had changed. The grieving widow mask had slipped just a little. There was a hardness in her eyes I'd glimpsed only once before in the garden that night. "Shelby, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "I know this is a difficult time for both of us, but we need to discuss practical matters." I set down the photo album I'd been looking through. "What kind of practical matters?" She sat across from me, her posture straight and businesslike. "Your living arrangements. After the will is read tomorrow and everything is transferred, I'll need you to vacate the guest house." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Excuse me." "You heard me. This property will be mine, and frankly, I think it's best for both of us if you find somewhere else to live. Too many memories here, you understand?" I stared at her, finally seeing the real Madison without any pretense. "You're kicking me out? Marcus hasn't even been dead a week." Her lips curved into a cold smile. "I'm being generous, actually. I could demand you leave immediately, but I'll give you 72 hours after the will reading to make arrangements." "Madison, what's happened to you? Is this about grief? We can work through this together." She laughed, a sharp sound that cut through my words. "Oh, Shelby, sweet, naive Shelby, I know you heard me that night in the garden. Did you really think I didn't see you lurking in the shadows?" My blood ran cold. She'd known all along that I knew. "But here's the thing," she continued, examining her manicured nails. "It doesn't matter what you heard or what you think you know. Marcus left me everything in his will. The houses, the money, all $57 million of it. And there's nothing you can do about it." "You never loved him." It wasn't a question. Love. She tilted her head as if considering the word. "I gave him 7 years of devoted companionship. I played the perfect wife, nursed him through his illness, made his final months as comfortable as possible. That's more than love, Shelby. That's service. And now it's time for me to collect my compensation." I stood up, anger finally overcoming shock. "You're a monster. Marcus adored you. And he died happy because of it. Would you have preferred I tell him the truth, that I found him boring and predictable, that every night in his bed was a performance, that I've been with Jake for 4 years planning our future while playing house with your son?" Each word was calculated to wound, and they found their mark. But she wasn't done. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, standing to face me. "Tomorrow the will is read and I inherit everything. You'll leave quietly, find yourself a nice retirement community somewhere, and we'll never speak again. Or," she paused for effect, "I tell everyone you made inappropriate advances toward me while Marcus was dying. That you tried to kiss me, touch me, that I had to lock my bedroom door at night. Who do you think they'll believe, the grieving widow or the lonely old man?" I felt physically sick. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me. I've got 7 years of practice playing the victim. I can cry on cue, Shelby. I can make people believe anything." She moved toward the door, then turned back. "Oh, and just in case you're thinking of trying something clever, remember that I control everything now. Every asset, every account, every property. You'll leave with whatever you can fit in your car and be grateful for it." She paused at the door, her final words delivered with casual cruelty. "You know what? Don't bother finding a nice retirement place. Go die in a dumpster for all I care. It's where you belong." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone with the devastating truth. My son was dead, and the woman he'd loved had killed whatever was left of our family. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for February, the sun mocking my dark mood as I drove to Harold Whitman's law office in White Plains. I'd barely slept, replaying Madison's threats and trying to figure out any possible response. She held all the cards. Marcus had been meticulous about his estate planning, making sure everything was properly documented and legally binding. If he'd left her everything, there was nothing I could do. Harold's office occupied the top floor of a stately building overlooking the courthouse. I'd been here many times over the years, first with Dorothy to set up our own estate plans, later with Marcus, when he started building his career. The familiar surroundings now felt alien, as if I were walking into an ambush. Madison was already there when I arrived, looking every inch the wealthy widow in a designer black suit and subtle pearl jewelry. She'd brought her own attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in estate law. They were seated on one side of Harold's conference table like opposing counsel at a deposition. "Shelby." Harold greeted me warmly, though I noticed concern in his eyes. "Can I get you some coffee water?" I shook my head and took my seat across from Madison. She didn't acknowledge me busy reviewing documents with her lawyer. The pretense of family connection had been completely abandoned. Harold cleared his throat and opened a leather folder containing Marcus's will. This is always a difficult process, especially so soon after loss. Marcus was very clear in his intentions, and I want to assure everyone that this will was prepared with full mental capacity and proper legal procedures. Madison leaned forward slightly, anticipation barely concealed behind her composed expression. Harold began reading the formal language, the whereases and heretofores, that preceded the actual distributions. When he reached the meat of the document, Madison's attorney was taking notes, while Madison herself sat perfectly still. To my beloved wife, Madison Ann Fitzgerald, I leave the entirety of my financial portfolio, including all investment accounts, stocks, bonds, and liquid assets, currently totaling approximately $57 million. Madison's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Harold continued. I also leave to Madison our primary residence at 47 Round Hill Road, Greenwich, Connecticut, including all contents therein, as well as our vacation properties in Martha's Vineyard and Vail, Colorado. Each item Harold read felt like another nail in my coffin. The cars, the art collection, Dorothy and I had started even Marcus's law school memorabilia. Everything went to Madison. By the time Harold reached my portion, Madison was practically glowing with satisfaction. To my father, Shelby James Fitzgerald, I leave all personal photographs, family mementos, and items of sentimental value not otherwise specified. I know he will treasure these memories of our time together as much as I have treasured having him as my father. That was it. Photos and mementos. After a lifetime of building wealth for my family, I was left with nothing but memories. Madison's attorney spoke first. Mr. Whitman, we'd like to discuss immediate transfer of assets. My client is anxious to begin settling the estate. Of course, Harold replied. The financial institutions have been notified. We can begin transfers as early as this week. Excellent. The attorney produced a folder of her own. We also have this matter to address. She slid a document across to me. An eviction notice for Mr. Fitzgerald from the guest house property. I looked at the paper without touching it. 72 hours notice, as discussed. Harold frowned. Madison, surely that's not necessary. Shelby just lost his son. The property belongs to my client. Patricia Chen interrupted. She has the right to determine who resides there. The 72 hours is actually quite generous, legally speaking. It's fine, Harold, I said quietly. I'll be out by Thursday. Madison finally looked at me directly. I think that's best for everyone. Fresh starts all around. Harold seemed deeply uncomfortable with the proceedings, but continued with the legal requirements. As he explained the tax implications and transfer procedures, I found myself studying Madison. She'd won. 7 years of deception had paid off exactly as she'd planned. In 72 hours, she'd have everything my family had built while I'd be homeless at 68. Is there anything else? Madison asked when Harold finished his explanations. Just signatures on some transfer documents, Harold replied. He seemed reluctant to end the meeting as if hoping something might change. Madison, I've known this family for 20 years. Are you certain? Quite certain, she cut him off. My husband's wishes were clear. I'm simply following them. As we prepared to leave, Harold asked Madison and her attorney to step out for a moment to discuss a technical matter with his assistant. Once we were alone, he moved quickly to my side. Shelby, he whispered urgently, pressing something into my hand. Read the will yourself tonight. Every word, every line. Pay attention to the details. He glanced toward the door, where Madison was visible through the glass, talking animatedly with her lawyer. Call me after you've read it. My home number is on the card. Before I could respond, Madison and her attorney returned. We completed the signatures in silence, the scratch of pens on paper, sounding like the end of everything I'd known. In the parking garage, Madison and I ended up in the elevator together, her attorney having taken the stairs. The moment the doors closed, she dropped all pretense. You should start packing immediately, she said conversationally. I'm having the locks changed Thursday afternoon. Was any of it real? I asked. Even a moment. She considered the question as if it were academic. The wedding was nice, the gifts were certainly real, and Marcus wasn't terrible in bed if a bit predictable. Does that count? The elevator opened at her floor. As she stepped out, she turned back one final time. Oh, I'm planning to sell the house. Too many memories, you understand. But don't worry, I'll make sure to throw out all those family photos before the estate sale. Unless you want to dig them out of the dumpster. The doors closed on her laughter, leaving me alone with Harold's mysterious card burning in my pocket, and a copy of the will he'd insisted I read. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the document that had destroyed my life, wondering what Harold could possibly have seen that would matter now. That evening back in the guest house, I'd soon be forced to leave. I spread the will across my dining table and began to read. Not the summary Harold had provided, but every single word of the legal document my son had signed. It was on page 12, buried in subsection C of paragraph 17, that I found it. I read the passage 3 times, then a fourth, my heart beginning to pound, as the implications became clear. My son, my brilliant lawyer son, might have just saved me from beyond the grave. I sat at my dining table until well past midnight, reading and rereading paragraph 17, subsection C of Marcus's will. The language was dense, full of legal terminology that would make most people's eyes glaze over. But I'd spent 40 years on Wall Street dealing with contracts, and what I found hidden in that subsection made my hands shake with a combination of hope and fury. The key passage read, "All bequests to my wife, Madison Ann Fitzgerald, are granted in accordance with the established Shelby Family Trust Guidelines as documented in Schedule K, attached hereto, and incorporated herein by reference." Schedule K. I flipped through the pages frantically until I found it a document I recognized immediately. It was the family trust guidelines Dorothy and I had established 20 years ago, when we first started building serious wealth. We'd wanted to protect our family assets from potential future issues, lawsuits, bad marriages, financial predators. Harold had helped us craft it, and Marcus had been present for the signing when he turned 21. The guidelines contained standard provisions about financial management investment strategies and charitable giving. But there in Section 4 was the clause that changed everything: the morality provision. Any beneficiary of the Shelby Family Trust who was found guilty of adultery criminal activity or actions that brought dishonor to the family name would forfeit all rights to trust assets. My hands were trembling as I dialed Harold's home number. He answered on the second ring as if he'd been waiting. "You found it," he said without preamble. "Harold, am I reading this correctly? Madison's inheritance is contingent on the family trust guidelines." Every penny. Harold confirmed. Marcus was very specific about that. He came to me 6 months ago, right after his diagnosis. He said he wanted to ensure that whoever inherited his estate would honor the family values you and Dorothy instilled in him. I sank into my chair, overwhelmed. Did he know about Madison's affair? Harold was quiet for a moment. He never said directly, but he insisted on adding that provision, and he made sure it was buried deep enough that a casual reading would miss it. He said, "Harold, my father taught me to always read the fine print. Make sure he remembers that lesson." Tears burned my eyes. Even facing death, my son had been protecting me. "Madison's been having an affair for 4 years. I heard her admit it. But how do I prove it?" "That's where things get interesting," Harold said. Marcus also set aside a separate fund, $50,000 in cash, designated for estate administration. He told me to give you access to it if you ever needed to investigate anything related to the will. I think he knew you might need resources. The next morning, I met Harold at his office before Madison's attorney could monitor our movements. He handed me access to the administration fund and a list of private investigators he trusted. "Be careful, Shelby," he warned. "Madison's not stupid. If she realizes what you're doing, she'll try to cover her tracks or accelerate her asset transfers." I hired Vincent Mackey, a former NYPD detective who specialized in matrimonial investigations. A gruff man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a reassuring competence, he listened to my story without judgment. 4-year affair, you said that leaves a trail. Nobody's that careful for that long." He pulled out a notebook. "Tell me about this Jake person." I shared what little I knew, the text message I'd seen Madison's phone conversation in the garden, the muscular man at the funeral. Vincent nodded, making notes. "First rule of investigation," he said. "People in affairs get comfortable. They start using credit cards, taking photos, leaving digital footprints. Give me 2 weeks and I'll have everything you need. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I moved out of the guest house as required, taking a room at an extended stay hotel in Stamford. Each day I packed more of my belongings, sorted through family photos, and pretended to accept my fate. When Madison came to inspect my packing progress, I played the broken old man perfectly. "You're taking this better than I expected," she observed, watching me wrap picture frames in newspaper. "What choice do I have?" I replied, not meeting her eyes. "You won. I'm too old and tired to fight." She seemed satisfied with my defeat. Jake and I are planning a trip to Turks and Caicos next month, a celebration of new beginnings. The house should sell quickly in this market. I nodded meekly, mentally noting the information for Vincent. Madison's overconfidence was making her sloppy exactly as I'd hoped. Vincent's first report came 5 days into the investigation. Jake Thompson, age 34, personal trainer at an upscale gym in Westchester. He'd been Madison's trainer for 5 years, their professional relationship evolving into something more intimate around year 2. Vincent had already obtained gym security footage, showing them leaving together multiple times per week. "But here's where it gets interesting," Vincent said, sliding a folder across the coffee shop table where we'd met. "They've got a joint bank account, opened 3 years ago under both names. She's been depositing money regularly, small amounts to avoid attention. The bank statements showed a clear pattern. Every month, Madison had deposited between $2,000 and $5,000 into the account. The money came from the household account Marcus had set up for her expenses. She'd been stealing from my son for years, building a nest egg with her lover. "There's more," Vincent continued. "I've got hotel receipts, credit card records showing jewelry purchases for someone who isn't your son, and—" He paused, pulling out another document. "A lease agreement for an apartment in White Plains. Both their names are on it. They've been maintaining a love nest for 2 years. Each piece of evidence felt like vindication and heartbreak combined. My son had lived with this betrayal, possibly known about it while fighting cancer. The cruelty of it took my breath away. "Can you get photos?" I asked. "Something undeniable." Vincent smiled grimly. "Already working on it. They've gotten very comfortable since the funeral. Less careful about public displays. Give me another week." That week, I had to attend a meeting at the Greenwich House to sign papers allowing Madison to list it for sale. Walking into the home I'd bought for my son's happiness felt like entering a mausoleum. Madison had already started packing boxes stacked in the foyer, labeled "Donate" and "Trash." I noticed several contained Marcus's personal items. "Oh, good you're here," Madison said breezily. "The realtor needs these signatures. We've already got 3 interested buyers, cash offers." As I signed the papers, I noticed Jake Thompson in the kitchen helping himself to coffee from the machine I'd given Marcus for Christmas 2 years ago. He was wearing one of Marcus's Harvard Law sweatshirts. The casual desecration of my son's memory made my jaw clench. "You remember Jake," Madison said, noticing my stare. "He's been so helpful with all this heavy lifting. Such a difficult time, you understand." Jake gave me a condescending nod. "Sorry for your loss, man. Marcus seemed like a good dude." The insincerity dripped from every word. This was the man who'd been sleeping with my son's wife, planning their future, while Marcus fought for every breath. I managed to mumble something appropriate and escaped as quickly as possible. That night, Vincent called with urgency in his voice. "You need to see what I found today. Can you meet me now?" We met at his office, a small space above the insurance agency. He pulled up files on his computer, his expression grim. I was following up on the pharmaceutical angle, checking what medications Madison was giving Marcus. Standard stuff mostly, but I noticed something odd in the receipts. She was filling prescriptions at 3 different pharmacies. Why would someone do that? My stomach turned. To hide something. Exactly. So I dug deeper, got a contact to pull the records. Shelby, she was filling prescriptions for medications Marcus wasn't prescribed. Specifically, she was getting mercury-based compounds used in certain industrial applications. Not enough to kill quickly, but administered over time. The room spun. She poisoned him! I can't prove she gave them to him, but the timing is suspicious. The purchases started 2 months before his collapse and continued throughout his illness. Mercury exposure can cause neurological symptoms that would mask as tumor progression. It wouldn't cause the cancer, but it could accelerate deterioration. I had to grip the desk to stay upright. It was one thing to know Madison had betrayed my son emotionally and financially. It was another to realize she might have actively hastened his death. "We need to involve the police," I said. Vincent nodded. "I've already compiled everything for law enforcement. But first we need to document the adultery to freeze her assets. If she realizes we're onto the poisoning, she'll run. Rich widow disappearing to a non-extradition country with $57 million. It happens more than you'd think." The final phase of Vincent's investigation focused on getting irrefutable evidence of the affair. Madison and Jake had indeed grown careless in their confidence. Vincent's photographer captured them entering their White Plains apartment together, kissing in the parking lot, and most damningly checking into a luxury hotel in Manhattan under their real names. "Adultery proven 6 ways to Sunday," Vincent said, organizing the evidence into a comprehensive file. "No way she can deny this." But there was one more devastating discovery. Vincent had managed to clone Madison's phone during a gym visit, giving us access to her text messages. The conversations with Jake went back years, full of explicit content and cruel jokes about Marcus. But the most damning were the recent ones. "Finally free of that pathetic loser," Madison had texted the day after the funeral. "7 years of my life, but worth every second for this payday." Jake's response: "You deserve it, baby. You earned every penny putting up with him." Another exchange discussed their plans to sell everything and move to Costa Rica. Madison had already been in contact with offshore banking institutions, preparing to move the money beyond U.S. jurisdiction. "We need to move fast," Vincent advised. "She's planning to transfer everything within the month. Once that money leaves the country, it's gone forever." I sat in my hotel room that night, surrounded by evidence of betrayal that would have broken Marcus's heart. But mixed with the pain was pride. My son had seen through Madison's facade enough to protect our family legacy. Even dying, he'd been smarter than all of us. "Thank you, son," I whispered to his photo. "Now let me finish what you started." The plan came together with the precision of a military operation. Harold, Vincent, and I met with the district attorney's office, presenting evidence of both the adultery and the potential poisoning. Assistant DA Michelle Roberts, a sharp woman in her 40s with a reputation for pursuing white-collar crime, reviewed our files with growing interest. "The adultery is clear-cut," she said, flipping through photos of Madison and Jake. "This definitely violates the trust provisions, but the poisoning, that's attempted murder if we can prove it. We'll need to exhume your son's body for toxicology." The thought of disturbing Marcus's rest gutted me, but justice demanded it. "Do what you need to do." "We'll need to move simultaneously," Otto Roberts explained. "Freeze the assets based on the trust violation while we investigate the criminal charges. But here's the challenge: we need her to stay put. If she gets wind of this, she'll run." Harold leaned forward. "What if we make her think she needs to be here? Schedule a trust review meeting, something routine, that requires her signature." "Even better," I said, an idea forming. "Tell her there's a problem with one of the property transfers, something that could delay her getting the money. She'll come running." We scheduled the meeting for the following Thursday at Harold's office. Madison was told there was an issue with the Martha's Vineyard property deed that required immediate attention, or the entire estate distribution could be held up for months. "Absolutely not," she said when Harold called her. "I have plans. Can't this wait?" "I'm afraid not," Harold replied smoothly. "The title company found a lien that predates Marcus's ownership. If we don't clear it immediately, all the estate assets will be frozen pending resolution. It could take 6 months or more." The threat of delayed money worked perfectly. Madison agreed to the meeting, grumbling about incompetent lawyers, and demanding it be handled quickly. Meanwhile, the exhumation order came through. The medical examiner found exactly what Vincent had suspected: elevated levels of mercury in Marcus's tissue samples, far beyond what could be explained by environmental exposure. The pattern suggested systematic poisoning over months. This wasn't meant to kill him outright, the examiner explained. The mercury would have exacerbated his neurological symptoms, made him weaker, more confused. In a brain cancer patient, it would significantly accelerate decline. I had to leave the room when she explained how much suffering the poisoning would have added to Marcus's already agonizing final months. Madison hadn't just waited for him to die. She'd pushed him toward death faster. Thursday arrived with spring rain pelting Harold's office windows. I arrived early, taking my position in a small conference room where I could watch the main meeting room through interior windows. The trap was set Harold in his usual spot: 2 assistants, who were actually detectives, and a court reporter who would document everything. Madison arrived 15 minutes late, annoyed and dripping designer umbrella water on Harold's carpet. "Let's make this quick. I have a flight to catch this afternoon." "Of course," Harold said, genial. "Just need you to review these documents about the property lien." As Madison bent over the papers focused on protecting her money, Harold's assistant knocked and entered. "Mr. Whitman, the trust officers are here for the scheduled review." Madison looked up sharply. "What trust review?" The door opened, fully revealing Ada Roberts, 2 federal investigators, and Detective Patricia Santos from the Connecticut State Police. Madison's face went white. "Madison Ann Fitzgerald." Detective Santos began, "You're under investigation for fraud, violation of fiduciary trust, and the murder of Marcus Fitzgerald." "That's ridiculous." Madison shot to her feet. "I want my lawyer, now." "By all means," Ada Roberts said calmly. "You'll need one. We have evidence of systematic adultery throughout your marriage, which violates the terms of your inheritance. All assets are hereby frozen pending investigation." Madison's perfectly composed mask finally cracked. "You can't prove anything. Marcus left me everything. It's mine." "Actually," Harold interjected, pulling out the trust documents, "he left it to you contingent on adherence to the Shelby family trust guidelines. Your 4-year affair with Jake Thompson voids the bequest entirely." "You're lying," but her voice wavered. She knew we had her. Ada Roberts opened a folder spreading out photos of Madison and Jake. Hotel receipts, bank statements, text messages. Madison's face went from pale to ashen as she realized the extent of what we'd discovered. Additionally, Detective Santos continued, "We have evidence you purchased mercury compounds and administered them to your husband during his illness. The medical examiner confirmed toxic levels in his system." "I want immunity." The words burst from Madison before she could stop herself. "It wasn't my idea. Jake planned everything. I'll testify against him." The room went silent, except for the court reporter's keys clicking. Madison had just confessed to conspiracy. "Jake Thompson is already in custody," Ada Roberts informed her. "And he's been very cooperative. He says the poisoning was entirely your idea. You researched it, purchased the compounds, and administered them in Marcus's medications." It was a lie. Jake was still free, had no idea what was happening. But Madison didn't know that. "That lying bastard!" she shrieked. "It was all him. He said if we could just make Marcus die faster, we'd have everything. I told him it was too dangerous, but he insisted. He threatened to leave me if I didn't do it." Every word dug her grave deeper. The detectives exchanged satisfied looks as Madison continued ranting, implicating herself with every sentence. She detailed how Jake had researched untraceable poisons, how they'd decided on mercury because it would mimic Marcus's existing symptoms. How she'd dissolved it in his liquid medications, increasing the dose as he grew weaker. "Mrs. Fitzgerald," Detective Santos interrupted. "You're under arrest for murder, fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." "No." Madison lunged for the door, but the detectives were ready. They had her in handcuffs before she'd taken 3 steps. "This isn't fair. I earned that money, 7 years of my life wasted on that pathetic—" "Madison." I stepped out from the adjacent room where I'd been watching. She froze at the sight of me. Marcus knew. Maybe not the details, but he knew something was wrong. That's why he protected the family assets. Even dying, my son was smarter than you. Her face contorted with rage. "You destroyed everything. You couldn't just die quietly like you were supposed to. Neither of you—" "My son loved you," I said quietly. "Despite everything, he loved you until the end. That's the real tragedy here. Not that you failed to steal his money, but that you murdered a good man who would have given you everything honestly if you just loved him back." The fight went out of her then. She sagged between the detectives, finally understanding that her game was over. As they led her away, she turned back one last time. "How?" she asked. "How did you know to look—" I pulled out my wallet and showed her a photo, Marcus at his Harvard Law graduation, beaming with pride. He was my son, a brilliant lawyer who spent his career spotting lies in contracts. You never stood a chance. The news of Madison's arrest spread through Marcus's social circle like wildfire. Those who'd wept at her eulogy performance were horrified to learn the truth. The story made national news. Black Widow murders husband for $57 million fortune. Every sordid detail came out during the trial. Jake Thompson arrested the day after Madison proved to be exactly the coward we'd suspected. Offered a plea deal for testimony against Madison, he sang like a canary. He revealed how Madison had targeted Marcus from the beginning, researching his family's wealth before orchestrating their chance meeting at the charity gala. She called it her big score, Jake testified, avoiding Madison's murderous glare from the defendant's table. Said she'd put in the time, play the perfect wife, and wait for the payout. But when Marcus got sick, she saw an opportunity to speed things up. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder fraud conspiracy, and a host of lesser charges. The judge, clearly disgusted by the calculating cruelty of the crime, sentenced her to life without the possibility of parole. "You didn't just murder Marcus Fitzgerald," the judge said during sentencing. "You tortured him during his most vulnerable moments, betrayed the sacred trust between spouses, and attempted to steal a family's legacy built over generations. You represent the worst of human greed and callousness." Madison listened, stone-faced, her beauty dimmed by months in custody and the weight of her conviction. The woman who'd once charmed everyone she met now looked exactly like what she was, a killer stripped of her mask. With Madison convicted and the will's provisions voided, all of Marcus's assets reverted to me as his sole surviving family. $57 million that she'd killed to possess now sat in accounts she'd never touch. But the money felt tainted heavy with the weight of how much it had cost. I established the Marcus Fitzgerald Memorial Foundation within a month of the trial's conclusion. The foundation would fund brain cancer research, provide support for families dealing with terminal illness, and offer legal aid to those who'd been victimized by financial predators. It seemed fitting that Marcus's legacy would be protecting others from the kind of evil that had taken his life. The Greenwich house sold quickly, as Madison had predicted, but instead of funding her beach retirement with Jake, the proceeds went to establishing a state-of-the-art hospice facility in Westchester. The Marcus Fitzgerald Center for Compassionate Care would provide the kind of genuine devotion that Madison had only pretended to give. On a cold December morning almost a year after Marcus's death, I visited Madison in prison. She'd requested the meeting through her lawyer, claiming she had something important to tell me. Against my better judgment, curiosity won. The woman who met me in the visiting room bore little resemblance to the polished beauty who'd charmed her way into our lives. Prison had stripped away all artifice, leaving someone hollow-eyed and bitter. Still, when she saw me, she attempted her old manipulative smile. "Shelby, thank you for coming." I sat across from her, separated by reinforced glass. "What do you want, Madison?" "I've had time to think," she began, then laughed bitterly. "Nothing but time, actually. And I realized I need to tell you something. About Marcus." My jaw tightened. "Don't you dare!" "He knew," she interrupted. "Not about the poisoning god, no. But about Jake. About 6 months before he got sick, he found out about the affair." I sat back, stunned. "That's impossible. He would have—" "Left me, yes, he planned to. He'd even seen a divorce attorney. But then the diagnosis came and everything changed." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "He called off the divorce proceedings, said he didn't want to spend his remaining time in legal battles. But more than that, he didn't want you to know your daughter-in-law was a fraud. He was protecting you even then." "You're lying," I said. But something in her expression suggested otherwise. "I'm many things, Shelby, but I'm not lying about this. Marcus loved you more than anything. He told me once that his greatest fear wasn't dying, it was leaving you alone. That's why he stayed quiet about Jake, why he made sure the will protected the family assets. He knew I'd show my true colors eventually, and he trusted you to handle it." I had to look away, overwhelmed by this final revelation of my son's character. Even betrayed, even dying, he'd thought of others first. "Is that all?" I asked finally. "No." Madison straightened in her chair. "I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not for trying to take the money, I'd do that again in a heartbeat. But for the Mercury, for making his last months harder than they needed to be. That was cruel. Crueler than even I understood at the time." It wasn't much of an apology tainted with her continued greed and self-justification, but it was probably the closest thing to remorse she was capable of feeling. "Marcus forgave you," I said, standing to leave. "In his letter to me, he said he forgave everyone who'd wronged him. He didn't want to carry anger into whatever came next. So for his sake, Madison, I forgive you too. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean you escape consequences. You'll serve every day of your sentence knowing you traded a good man's love for money you'll never touch." I left her there, staring after me through the glass, finally understanding the full weight of what she'd lost. The letter Marcus had left with Harold became my most treasured possession. Written in his shaky handwriting during his final weeks, it revealed so much. Dad, if you're reading this, then Madison has shown her true nature and you've discovered the truth. Please don't blame yourself for not seeing it sooner. She fooled me too for years. But love makes us blind sometimes, and I don't regret loving her. I regret only that she couldn't love me back. I've made sure she can't hurt our family's legacy. The money you and Mom worked so hard to build will go where it was meant to, helping others, continuing our values, making the world a little better. That's worth more than any fortune. Take care of yourself, Dad. Find happiness again. Maybe get a dog, you always wanted one, but Mom was allergic. Travel to those places you and Mom planned to visit. Live well. That's the best revenge against those who tried to destroy us. All my love, Marcus. P.S. Thank Harold for me. Paragraph 17, subsection C was his idea. Best legal advice I ever got. I did get a dog, a golden retriever named Marcus, who filled the empty house with warmth again. I traveled to Italy, Greece, and Ireland, places Dorothy and I had dreamed of visiting. And I met Eleanor at a charity board meeting, a widow, who understood loss, but hadn't let it define her. We became friends then, more building something gentle and real in our twilight years. The Marcus Fitzgerald Center opened 2 years after his death. At the dedication ceremony, hundreds came to celebrate his memory, colleagues, friends, and families who'd already been helped by the foundation. Madison's name was never mentioned. She'd been erased from the narrative, a footnote, in a story about love triumphing over greed. Harold Whitman gave a speech about Marcus's foresight and intelligence, how even facing death he'd thought 3 steps ahead. He couldn't prevent his wife's betrayal, Harold said, but he could ensure it wouldn't succeed. That's the mark of a brilliant legal mind and an even better son. Vincent Mackey attended too, telling me afterward that the Madison Fitzgerald case had become required reading at investigator training seminars. Perfect example of how greed makes people sloppy, he said, and how love makes people smart. Your son set the perfect trap. We just had to spring it. Standing in the center that bore his name, watching families find comfort in their darkest hours, I felt Marcus's presence. Not ghostly or mystical, but in the tangible good his legacy was creating. Madison had stolen his final months, poisoned his body, and plotted to steal his fortune. But she'd failed to touch what really mattered, the love between a father and son, the values that survive beyond death, the truth that eventually comes to light. Later that evening, I stood at Marcus's grave with Eleanor beside me. The headstone bore a simple inscription: "Beloved son, brilliant mind, generous heart." I told him about the center, about the families we'd helped, about Eleanor, and the unexpected happiness she'd brought to my life. "You protected me even in death, son," I said, echoing the words I'd thought that night when everything came crashing down. The money never mattered. Having you for 38 years was worth more than all the wealth in the world, and ensuring justice for you, that was priceless. As we walked away, Eleanor squeezed my hand. "He'd be proud of you, Shelby. Not for catching Madison, but for what you did after. Turning pain into purpose. That's the real victory." She was right. Madison sat in a cell counting days that would never end, while Marcus's love continued to ripple outward, touching lives and healing wounds. In the end, love had won. It always does, even when it takes time for justice to catch up. The last time Madison's lawyer contacted me, it was to say she wanted to appeal based on inadequate representation. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She'd played her game and lost, while Marcus had played a longer game and won. The boy I'd raised to read every contract carefully had written his final contract perfectly, protecting his family even as his body failed him. That's the lesson I carry forward. Love thinks ahead. Greed thinks only of the moment. Marcus thought ahead. Madison thought only of the money in front of her. And in that difference lay everything that mattered. Now, as I share this story, I think of all the families out there dealing with similar betrayals. Maybe not as dramatic as murder and millions, but the same fundamental violation of trust. The spouse who empties the bank accounts during a partner's illness. The child who manipulates an aging parent for inheritance. The friend who sees tragedy as opportunity. To them, I say this: the truth has a way of surfacing. Justice may move slowly, but it moves. And love, real love, protects its own in ways we don't always understand until we need it most. Marcus protected me. Now his story might protect others. That's worth more than $57 million. That's worth everything. So I ask you, have you ever experienced a betrayal that cut so deep you thought you'd never recover? How did you find your way back to trust, to hope, to believing that good ultimately triumphs over evil? Share your stories in the comments below, not for sympathy, but for strength. Let others know they're not alone in facing life's hardest tests. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to hear more tales of justice and redemption. Share it with someone who needs to hear that truth eventually comes to light, that love thinks ahead, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well while ensuring evil doesn't prosper. Thank you for joining me on this difficult journey. May you always read the fine print, trust your instincts, and remember that love, real love, always finds a way to protect what matters most. Until next time, hold your loved ones close, value character over charm, and never forget the smallest words in a contract can make the biggest difference in life.